everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 46 of Monster. And yes, so when we last left off, Sook and Grimmer were face to face with some of the Czech police being suddenly murdered, we assume by Johann, and they don't know what to do now. So it's like it's just leaving us on a big cliffhanger of, okay, well, what now? Very much paralleling Tenma when the doctors were killed, only now there's a clear tie that he's going to be suspect because they were murdered in his house. Why else would they not suspect him? So, and then of course he's in cahoots with Grimmer, and they have been chasing him thinking that he has been in cahoots with Grimmer. That's going to create more suspicion. So it's just getting pretty hairy, right? And we're not just talking about Johann and drag. So I've got some comments as I choke on my own spit. I have some comments, and I also want to talk about Volume 5 of the manga. I got Volume 5, like I said. I am a little bit creeped out by Tenma on the cover looking like a demon and then transitioning over to Reichwein. A little bit freaked out about that, not gonna lie. I don't like it. I feel like it's Tenma questioning if he is a monster for killing Roberto or not, and because of what he thinks he has to do to Johann. So that remains to be seen. And then there's Prague. We get the front of Prague there. We also have this nice little beautiful little wreath with the monster in there, the bitch with no name. So there's that. But this volume is really interesting. There are a couple of things that stand out I want to talk about real quick. The parallel between at the very beginning where Tenma thinks back to when the twins disappeared and the one guy in the hospital was like, oh, well, they're playing hide and seek. And then that transitions to Tenma thinking about himself as a kid, asking, please find me, here I am. There is a moment where Tenma is reflecting on this and he smiles like it was a good memory, which I thought was interesting, and then calls himself a scaredy cat. And then, of course, this wasn't in the anime, but the idea that Nina has been saying the word kill over and over again, and we've been thinking it's like kill Johann, do this. No, it's kill me. She wanted to die. So what do we do with that? Like, was she as a kid, was she saying kill me because she shot Johann in the face? Was she saying kill me because it's kind of like the monster of the West that Johann ends up eating? That remains to be seen. The monster story's in here in Volume 5, and it's in full color. It's beautiful. It is in full color, although it starts out in full color, and then once the monster starts inhabiting the little boy, then it switches over to this like weird sepia tone, only it's red, and then everything is in red tones, which is very, very creepy. But it looks exactly like the episode in the anime, so fun times. But for the most part, it's very, very similar. I will say this: I went throughout this volume because a lot of people have been commenting how a few of the reactors like could tell it was Johann in the scene of the anime because their jawline was different. I was like, that's such a random thing. Here's the thing. In the manga, yeah, they make Johann's jawline look a little bit more masculine than Nina's. But when you get to Johann as Anna, I'm going to show y'all. I compared the two in the book. Anna in this looks like Nina. Doesn't look like Johann at all. There is no masculine jawline, no hint. The only possible hint that I could see in the manga that would point to it being Johann instead of Nina is that there's one little, like a tiny panel, and it's where he's seeing her in the bar. When he's seeing her in the bar, there's a little panel of Nina with her eyes closed, and she's like, has this kind of smug look on her face. It's the only one that looks remotely, yeah, it's right here. It's the only one that looks remotely like Johann. I'm going to try to get close to the camera. It's this tiny little panel of her and him talking together. It looks like Johann. That's the only panel that I was like, oh, okay, that looks like him. But how would you know if you didn't see it coming? I think the manga does a much better job of hiding, at least at this point, that it's Johann. Now, what is curious about Volume 5 is that where it ends in the middle of an episode, which is weird. It ends in the middle of episode 43, or towards the end of episode 43. It ends with Grimmer giving him the key to the safe deposit box, and that's where Volume 5 ends, which I find rather curious, but there's a lot going on in this volume. It goes from like episode 37 up through 43. There's a lot going on. I really like the way the mangaka draws Grimmer. The mangaka draws Grimmer. I think his expressions are a little bit more nuanced in this version, and they're even more pained and kind of like melancholy. And you really get a sense of him being kind of disturbed by Petrov and the experiment that he's doing there in Prague in the manga. I think the expressions show Grimmer a little bit more disturbed. But yeah, this is a really good volume. I read it this morning. I highly recommend, if you get a chance to get it, this is probably my favorite volume out of all of them so far. Volume 5 is, because it has the story in color, it has several other color pages, and it introduces Grimmer. So there we go, right? There we go. But I got some comments before we start this episode. CR noted, does the Kinderheim kids keep in touch with one another? It's easy to forget that the Kinderheim kids, that there were kids before the Johann incident that left Kinderheim. It's easy to forget that. One of them would have been the Joss guy that ends up getting shot by Richard. Richard ends up shooting one of the former Kinderheim residents. So it's easy to forget that, you know, there were actual graduates of Kinderheim before Johann arrived and had them all kill each other. So that's a very good question. And that also leads us to believe, was Grimmer's son one of those individuals? Because Grimmer's the one that notes, well, the graduates of Kinderheim aren't able to love. Was his son one of them? We don't know, but that's a very good question to ask. Sunray says that there was a secret Czechoslovakian police unit called the State Security that was from 1945 to 1990 when it supposedly disbanded. I'm like, if they're a secret police, did they really disband? But supposedly they did. And this takes place in 1995, 1996, so it would kind of make sense story-wise if they're saying the secret police was still active, they just weren't, you know, known. That would make sense with the storyline. So thank you, Sunray. MB talks about Petrov as a surrogate parent to the kids, kind of reflects back to Tenma being a seemingly surrogate parent to Johann. And so that kind of ties to the fact that Johann has some seeming resentment towards surrogate parents. We don't know exactly what the deal is. I'm going to say it's going back to Kinderheim when Wolf was trying to like be a surrogate parent to him and caused him all this problem. But it has been a running theme in the story so far. And then finally, Omaru kept saying, and this isn't just you, it's several people being like, well, we don't have any proof that Johann's an evil person. And I'm like, at this point, really, are we going to say that Johann's not, maybe not evil, but like, I don't know if I describe Johann as a good person, right? And my thing is, they were commenting saying, well, we just don't know from Grimmer. We know Grimmer's done some bad things, so why do we not think he's the same thing as Johann? And I'm like, I think at this point, the story has made it very evident that Johann and Grimmer are two different people. They are not the same. If they're evil, they're not the same evils. And I think the biggest difference for me is that we see the expressions of these characters behind the scenes. We see when no one else is watching, we see Grimmer's facial expressions. We see the care he takes towards the kids. We see how he has their best interests in mind. We see how much he's like distraught and worried about them. And there's that care and consideration. With Johann, he does interact with the kids. And yeah, he seems on the surface like he's just watching over them and it's fine. But I would argue that there are instances where the kids are like, I'm going to destroy the world. If it were Grimmer there, Grimmer would be like, oh, don't do that. And then Johann was like, And then Johann encourages them to jump off of rooftops and play chicken with one another. And I say that because there is a kid that's sitting with Johann when he tells the kid that Tim was going to kill him, that the kid was talking about playing chicken on the rooftop, and Johann never corrected or said, oh, you shouldn't do that. He just let it go. And then there's the thing with Junkers, there's the thing with Richard. At this point, anybody that's a Johann stan that's trying to tell me that Johann is innocent, I am not believing you at all. And I'm going to be like, okay, I'm ignoring your comment because you're trying to gaslight me. I'm like, no. I'm not saying that Johann is pure evil and has no motivation. We've established his motivation. I feel like I'm flogging the dead horse. But at the same time, you cannot tell me that Johann is an innocent bystander that's just meandering through life and hasn't done anything, because he has. He's shot people. He's killed the people in the apartment at this point. He's killed Petrov and Anna. He's killed Junkers. He's murdered a lot of people, and we know this for a fact. So I'm like, yeah, no. And the thing about it is, with Grimmer is trying to do good despite his sins. Johann seems to be leaning into his sins and saying, well, what's one more? You know, whereas Grimmer is like, there is a consequence, but I'm trying to do right by this moment. And there's just little nuances that make me appreciate Grimmer and what he's trying to do. You know, he tells Tenma, we have these sins, but we have to keep doing what we have to do. And I don't know, I guess you could say that Johann is the same. I'm not saying you couldn't. I guess you could say Johann is doing the same. But there is just this malice with Johann that I don't see with Grimmer. And all I will say is that the story is not over. We're just halfway. Don't try to persuade me with your gaslighting comments. Please don't. I will start ignoring you. And just let me experience the story. And by the end of it, we can have a big conversation about how they're all different and similar. I think that's the best. But it's not just Omaru. There's been other commenters that the moderators have been like, don't read that. And I'm like, good. Because they're trying to persuade me or give me leading hints and clues. And I'm like, just let me experience the story. As we saw in episode 44, it's fun when I'm surprised by things. If I know it's coming, there's no fun in that. So, yeah. But those are the comments that I have. I'm really excited. I've talked for way too long. But I'm ready to get into this episode and just see what we get. So, with that being said, I want to know how is Sook and Grimmer getting out of this? Are they getting out of this? What do we do with this? I don't know, y'all. But we need to find out. We are going to start episode 46 of Monster. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Remember when I was like, oh, Johann and Grimmer, totally different people, not alike in any way. I still maintain myself. I'm not going to backtrack and say that I'm necessarily wrong in that Grimmer is a better person than Johann. There's a distinct difference between the two of them, and I want to outline it, that I think makes all the difference in the world. But God, finding out finally the Magnificent Steiner, like what was going on with that, the idea, wow, there's so many parallels between Grimmer and Johann and Tenma and Sook. And now it makes sense why Johann's been letting Grimmer live. Johann, I'm sure, knows that Grimmer is a graduate of Kinderheim too. Because that's the thing. Johann has been very sympathetic towards fellow Kinderheim people. Like that same thing with the man that Richard killed. He defended him very hardcore. Was like, well, how can you judge him? You don't know what he's been through. To Richard, he very much sympathized and related to him, right? And so then it makes sense if Johann knows that Grimmer is also from Kinderheim, then it makes sense why he's not killed him. It makes sense why he helped him in the warehouse. It makes sense why he's been okay with him finding the tape. It makes sense why Grimmer knew exactly what the tape meant. It's like it all adds up, all makes sense. And now it's time for him to relay that information to Tenma. And so I'm like, what's fascinating is that like Tenma working alongside Grimmer, they're very similar. And so there comes this question, right? Because we have Grimmer, we'll put him here. We might as well just outline everybody. We have Grimmer, Johann, we have Tenma, and we have Sook, right? Both Grimmer and Johann talk about this monster inside them that comes out or is forced out, right? At this point. And we believe that Kinderheim, they're both members that have been at Kinderheim 511 that conditioned this monster to come out, right? The thing that makes the biggest difference for me as far as Grimmer and Johann is concerned is Grimmer actively tries to not do things that would trigger that monster. And what I mean by that is that he doesn't carry a gun. So he doesn't carry a gun because he knows what he's prone to do if he gets provoked, and he is aware of the brainwashing that he's had. He's aware of the brainwashing. And the sad thing is now it all makes sense why he confronted Petrov and was like, what are you doing with these kids? It's because he doesn't want the kids to be the same as him. Because he talks about how he's not capable of love. He says so many of those graduates there are not capable of love, which breaks my heart because I'm like, Grimmer, seems like this lovable person, and the fact that he may not be capable of love, I'm like, did he overcome that when he was with his son's mom? We don't know the story about that. Is the son a lie? I don't think so. The manga talks about, there's a page in the manga that talks about, and it's sitting over there, that's why I'm pointing to it, that talks about Grimmer getting a Gundam for his kid in Japan. I guess they couldn't say it in the anime because of product placement, but he talks about getting a Gundam for his kid, and that's when he said he died. So I don't think he was lying about that. But we don't know the circumstances behind his kid. Did he kill his kid? We don't know. But the reason why he knew all the imagery was because he was there himself. Not as an adult, but as a kid growing up in Kinderheim. So Kinderheim's been around for quite some time. Not just 20 years, but possibly a lot more than that. But he talks about not being capable of love. However, and he talks about how he had to train himself to smile. Right? And God, that's the saddest thing, is that the hardest part about was training himself to smile. And that's why he does it all the time. It's all a big facade. It's all fake. The thing of it is that Johann, you could argue the same thing, is that smile is not necessarily forced, but it is a facade. And Johann does not seem capable of love. The thing about it is, I feel like my big difference is that Grimmer actively tries to, one, keep himself from harming people. He stays away from a gun. He is researching and trying and involving himself in dangerous situations, but he's not actively killing people along the way. It's all a defense mechanism, right? It is a defense mechanism in that moment where he has only killed someone when he was up against the wall in a corner and had no other option. That's been the only time he's ever done it. Whereas with Johann does not seem to be he's actively not trying to overcome his brainwashing. He almost seems to be leaning into it. Right? Like I said before, he's leaning into it. He's like, oh, well, you want me to be a monster? Fine, I'll be a monster, and I don't care, and I'm not discriminating who I hurt. It's just all for me. Right? Whereas Grimmer seems to be actively trying to help others. Johann is just trying to help his own agenda. That's the biggest difference for me, is that Grimmer tries to save Sook. He tries to help out Tenma. He's trying to help out the children. He is doing all these things that's actively trying to go against the teachings he got at Kinderheim. Whereas Johann just seems to be very bitter about the teachings he got at Kinderheim, and it was like, well, fine, that I'm going to take what I've learned and apply it to everything and just whatever. And then for Johann, the monster getting activated, he's put all those like cryptic warnings up on the water towers and everything saying the monster's growing inside of me. But at the same time, it's like, what has been the trigger? What has been the trigger, honestly? And he hasn't like just outright murdered people left and right, but he did go up and like kill certain people. He is killing people to get his agenda accomplished, whereas Grimmer is not killing people to get his agenda accomplished. He's only done it when it's been like dire straits, do or die. He hasn't just walked up into a warehouse, shot people, or gone into an apartment, shot people. Johann has killed people to manipulate things for his agenda, right? He has basically killed to manipulate an agenda, whereas Grimmer has not. It's been for defense. So, again, and I say that because Johann did not have to go to the apartment and shoot those guys. He did not have to shoot Junkers. There has not been a moment with Johann where he has killed in self-defense that we've seen. But we've seen him kill people, but it's not been in self-defense. So I think for me, at this point, that's the biggest difference between the two of them. But there are a lot of similarities. Their backgrounds, the fact that they've all been like, the fact that they both had no name and were given a name. The fact that his name is Wolfgang Grimmer makes me think that if it's Wolfgang Grimmer, and of course, Wolfgang could be a popular German name, makes me think that it's tied to wolf, the same way that Johann is tied to wolf. I think that could be the same, that they were both influenced by the same man. The fact that Grimmer doesn't necessarily remember Petrov at the time, or didn't know exactly what he was doing. He was a kid. He doesn't have very big memories of it, but he suspects that Petrov was there when he was there, is interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I like Grimmer's character more than Johann's because Grimmer has this warmth to him. And I know that the smile is a facade, but there's something about him that says he's trying to be a better person. He's trying to do good. And there's just a warmth about it. And I think it's the fact that he wants to collaborate with others. I think it's the fact that he involves others around him, right? Others around him. The whole thing with the picnics and the food. Someone commented a few episodes ago that the picnics are like, when Grimmer has the picnics and the food around them, anytime we've seen people gather for food, it's like a sign of humanity. It's a sign of connection, of camaraderie, and building these connections with people. And Grimmer has been all about it. He's been having dinner with people, like sharing food, like trying to be human. Johann is not trying to be human in that regard. We never see Johann eat with people. I mean, he's been at the bar with Sook, don't get me wrong, but we've not seen him sit down and have meals with people. He didn't show up and have a meal with Wolf. He killed everybody and then left. But yeah, he's not been trying to do these little acts of humanity that Grimmer is trying to do, and I think that's what makes me like his character more, that he's trying to bridge that. I'm worried about Grimmer. I'm really worried. Now that we're getting backstory, I'm like, I don't want Grimmer to die. I don't want that to happen. And I'm like, damn it, show. We've only had him here for 5 episodes. Quit. Don't kill this man when we just met him. Stop. But I don't know what's going to happen. But I love Grimmer to pieces. I'm hoping that Sook lives. I feel very bad for Sook. But yeah, and the thing about it is that Sook and Tenma, that Johann is linking their fates through these crimes. And my thing is, why? My thing is, why? Because the thing about it is that Tenma and Sook have established that they're both people who care about justice and saving others. Like, they're both good people who are just, like, innocent, right? And they have this, like, kind of purity to them. And I'm like, Johann, why are you trying to corrupt them? Why are you trying to ruin their lives? Tenma saved you, damn it! Like, what the hell? Like, I thought for a second that when Johann was seeing what a good person Sook was, or was trying to be, that he'd, you know, be somewhat sympathetic. But no! He set up the same thing. I'm like, but why? What is the point? And I feel like at this point, one of Tenma's big goals is like to find out the whole reason why he wants to chase down Johann is like, why are you doing this? Why did you target me? Why are you doing all of these things to myself and Sook to put us in jeopardy? Like, what's the point of it all? You know? And I think that's the big question that, you know, by the end of the series is going to be one to get answered. So the douche Zumkut newspaper publishing company in the Czech branch, I feel like at this point, there's been a lot of parallels to the very beginning of the series when Tenma was going to see more and getting the information from the freelance newspaper press there. It's very similar to this one. I thought there was a lot of parallels that were really cool. I liked them quite a bit. And they're talking about holding a press conference with the story in Prague that's going on. So yeah, old Sook's made the paper and has a big news story about these police officers being killed. And he's like, you've been looking for something here all night. So talking about how Tenma's been there all evening looking through the articles, trying to gather information, right? And he's like, oh yeah, I found the article I was looking for. So he talks about Mr. X in this article. And he's like, Mr. X, it's from 3 years ago. So I'm going to take this on here. 3 years ago, there is a Mr. X. And what did we establish in this article? He was trying to expose the truth behind the former Czechoslovakian secret police, which Sunray pointed out had disbanded. So they were trying to point out the truth behind the secret police. All right. Trying to point that out about them there, and said, and he's like, oh yeah, I wrote that article. After the wall came down, the Germans' right-wing influence suddenly increased, and the former Czechoslovakian state police established a crime syndicate. So there's this crime syndicate that it became after the police had disbanded and the wall came down. So all of these things kind of aligning with one another, right? all these things aligning, and the fact that it was 3 years ago that all this started to come out. And he's like, I wrote that article. And he's very proud of it. The main newspaper guy is really proud. He's like, do you know who Mr. X was that was interviewed in this article? And the guy's like, do you realize what you're asking? So Tenma wants to talk to Mr. X. And the newspaper man makes it very clear that that is a very dangerous interview to set up, because this man has information about the former police. There's possibilities that you could get hurt. He's like, you're supposedly Japanese correspondents, like you don't even know Czech, and you want to set up an interview with this guy that's really dangerous. Do you know what you're asking? So I do want to know where Tenma goes with that, if he finds out information and what that could possibly lead to, or if it's just a red herring to get us involved in the episode and show us how Tenma's been able to walk around Prague and not be noticed. So, but that's interesting. And again, we talked about the secret police unit in Czechoslovakia disbanding, and now it's rumored there's this crime syndicate, which would connect to Zeman, would connect to the guys he's dealing with, trying to get Johann's information. It's all adding up, right? All adding up. And he's like, and Tenma makes a nice little like fake reason why he's trying to find out things. Tenma is pretty resourceful. He's smart. He's a freaking doctor. He knows how to weasel his way around. And he's like, these people are scary. He's like, I risked my life to interview them. He's like, and even now they're still scary. Because of it, it created an uproar. And then we connect to Sook's case, where he's like, do you know about what's going on with Detective Sook right now? And he's like, some reporter you are. I like that he questions Tenma's like reporting ability. He's like, you should know the news by now, you young whippersnapper. And then he pulls it out. It's published in our paper. He killed 2 detectives. And that's when Tenma realizes just how similar their cases are and understands that it's from Johann. Mm-hmm. My thing is Lunge going to keep up with the news outside of Germany and Prague? Is Lunge going to keep up with any of this and make any extra outside connections? Or is Lunge sticking to just Germany? That's the question. Like right now, we haven't seen Nina or Dieter outside of Germany. We haven't seen Reichwein or Rudy outside of Germany. And we haven't seen Lunge. So are they all just doing things in Germany right now and then waiting for Tenma to get back to like catch him up on what's been going on? Because I mean, the only good thing is that we know that Johann's in Prague, so he can't be doing bad stuff in Germany right now. Maybe. So we think. I really hope we get a catch up of what's been going on in Germany while Tenma's been in Prague. I really hope we get a catch up, but it's only episode 46. We still have a lot of episodes to go. So that's very likely. I'm curious how long we're staying in Prague. I mean, we technically have like 74 to 64, 64, 54. We have like 28 episodes left, which is plenty of time to move around, but I'm interested, right? Because we've been here about 5 or 6 episodes. So he goes to see the mom, see Sook's mom. And he walks by. Now, the guys he walks beside, she's like, you're wasting your time, the nurse says, because we'll talk about this in a second. But the guys he walks past, we see the 2 guys standing there. They're the guys that Sook talked to in the bar. And now, the manga makes it very clear the guys in the bar that he was talking with the night that he met Johann were not police officers. They were just his friends. Whatever. Room 409. I feel like the rooms have significance. Was the room that Schubalt was in? Was it, or Schuwald, was it 402? I feel like the hospital rooms have a similar number or like connection that way, but I'm not entirely sure. So we established she's the only one in the room at the end there. She's like this little old lady. You're his mother, aren't you? And she has the little record player there. Mm-hmm. Now, I think he said, if I'm remembering correctly, that his mother had a stroke and that's why she was there and he was taking care of her. My great-great-grandmother had a stroke when I was a kid, and my great-grandmother took care of her in-house and had like an in-house nurse with her. And everything that Sook's mom does in this moment is very similar to her. Like when you had a conversation with her, she was there, she would talk to you, but her memory was completely messed up. Like she called me my mom's name all the time. She could never remember my own name. She'd be like, oh, you're so-and-so, or oh, you're so-and-so, right? And I'd be like, well, that's my mom, that's my aunt, that's my grandma. But you know, the thing about it is when you have a conversation with somebody that's had that memory alteration like that, the best thing to do is just go with it, because otherwise you just frustrate them and they can't help it. Their memory's been altered. So when she talks about, oh, the neighbor thinks that I stole this thing, Katerina, I'm like, she's remembering when she was a child. So it very much is indicative of a stroke victim, of how their memory has been changed. They're still there. They're still lucid. They're still able to have a conversation with you, but their memory, their long-term memory is usually there. Like my great-great-grandmother can remember long-term things amazingly, but short-term memory, it was not there at all. And she's so sweet. Like, she's just so nice. And he's like, did he call and write to you? And she doesn't give him any direct answers. But when he says her son's innocent, she's like, like, I feel like almost in that moment she judged Tenma and realized he was a good person and was like, I can trust you by giving you this information of where my son was playing, which was on Bruno Street. Now the problem is, as we come to find out, all these other guys know about the location, so it's very possible she told it to every person that came in the room because she didn't know any different. And so there's that. But the idea of when he played detective there, and she's like, yes, I knew. And so then she's like, there was a monster without a name. And the fact that they gave her the tape for safekeeping, oh my gosh, that just blows my mind. But honestly, yeah, it's the best place to put that tape, because who's going to listen to this old little lady that has a stroke and is just saying random things? They're not going to take her seriously. Just a terrifying, like, little jump scare reveal that she has the tape and the data information. I freaking love it. I love that twist. That's absolutely great. So then we go to the warehouse, the house on Bruno Street that Sook grew up playing in, and then Grimmer brings him the paper and everything. The thing that's so crazy is, now that we know that the hardest thing Grimmer had to learn was to smile, the fact that he's doing it all the time makes it such a sadder reflection that Grimmer is just, he's smiling despite himself, despite his upbringing, despite the obvious pain that he's in losing his son, despite the idea that he can't remember his past, despite the fact that he knows that he's killed people, despite his sins. He's like, I have to do what I have to do. I have to keep moving forward. I'm just going to grin and bear it, right? Just that idea of grinning and bearing it. And it's almost, I almost feel like the idea of him smiling is, I know this is the hardest thing I had to learn, but I'm going to do it all the time now because it's all I can do, right? Oh my God. Right. The two other doctors died from poison candy. Now, the thing of it is that he's like, Grimmer's like, this is exactly like Tenma's case from all those years ago. It's the exact same thing. So he's like, whoever is responsible for this is probably responsible for that too. Like, Grimmer puts two and two together. And poor Sook. Sook is just like, he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to be on the run for 10 years. Like, bless his heart. And Grimmer's just sitting there eating a sandwich with this, like, bottled water, like, I don't know what to tell you, man. But I like that Grimmer is trying to help Sook. He's like, you're different. He's like, you have me as a witness. I can testify for you. But him testifying for Sook is like a death flag for Grimmer. Because if he goes in and does that, he's possibly going to be charged and on trial and put in prison. And then he talks about the beautiful blonde girl. Now, again, I don't think Sook realizes it's the one that he's talked to. I don't think he wants to put two and two together in that regard. I think Grimmer kind of knows, but I don't know if Grimmer knows that Sook has met with the blonde woman, because I don't think Sook has told him. And then he's like, how am I supposed to disappear? And that's the thing. That is a big difference between Tenma and Sook. Tenma was willing to disappear. He was willing to disappear. He knew who Johann was. And the thing about it is, Sook doesn't really have a connection to Johann like Tenma does. Sook knows Johann through being Anna, but he doesn't have a reason to follow Johann yet. He doesn't have a reason to follow him yet and be on the same path that Tenma has been for revenge. For Sook, he's just like, I can't run on for my whole life. I am not, do not have the constitution for that. Again, Tenma and Sook are very similar, but there is difference. Just like Grimmer and Johann are very similar, but there is difference. And so Tenma was fine with going on the run because he was going after Johann. He had a mission, and so going on the run did not bother him. But for Sook, it's a completely different situation. And poor Grimmer's like, you got to calm down, man. You got to get a grip on yourself. or you're not going to make it out of here. In the end, you're the only one you can trust. And that's so fascinating that he says that, because I think Johann believes the same thing. I think Johann believes he's the only one that he can trust. But what's interesting is that Grimmer, he says, in the end, the only one you can trust. But Grimmer's also actively trying to trust others, which is fascinating. And I don't feel like Johann is trying to actively trust others at all. But I feel like Grimmer is trying to. It's almost like in spite of himself, he's trying to open his heart up to other people, even when he knows it's a bad idea. And so then, yeah, they eat there with the canned tuna, the water, and the sandwiches. And then the moment he went by that damn window, I was like, Sook, why are you doing this? Don't do that. And then, so yeah, and he says that we do it in the name of justice. And that's so, I feel like Grimmer in a lot of ways is not envious, but I think admiring that Sook has this like dedication to being good and doing things in the name of justice, because I don't think Grimmer really knows why he does things. He just does them because he's trying to figure out the past with Kinderheim. He's trying to connect it to the present with Tenma. He's trying to like do things just out of curiosity and to figure things out, which doesn't seem too different from Johann, but Johann has an agenda, right? Johann has things he's trying to accomplish, like with the child laws and things, and setting stuff up with Tenma. It's so fascinating. And then seeing that they're surrounded. This whole stakeout, the fact that they were surrounded was terrifying. The guy, it's like all these stressors in one. There's the man demanding the tape through the door. There's the people upstairs thinking about breaking in. There's the sniper outside of the window. There's the people surrounding the place. It is absolutely terrifying. And this whole incident was just horrific. And Grimmer's smart. He puts the thing in front of the door thinking, okay. But then the sniper's just sitting there just shooting Sook. And the thing about it is, again, if you talk about why I like Grimmer more than Johann, it's that when Sook is being shot, like, here's the thing, he's shot 3 times. Junkers was shot 3 times, right? And so the fact that Sook being shot, Grimmer is terrified. He's panicked. He's like, hey, it's okay. Like, he clearly cares in that moment for Sook. When Junkers was being shot by Johann, he didn't care. And so far from what we've seen, the people getting shot, everything, Johann hasn't cared. No, not one bit. And with Grimmer, we've seen him care. So again, that's my big thing. Because I feel like in the comments, some people have been like, well, they're the same, so how can you feel? They are different. They have very similar upbringings, very similar thematic elements, but they are different, and there's a point to that, right? The show is trying to make them different for a reason. And he said it's okay. And then he said, you should just save yourself. And Grimmer's like, I'm not leaving you. And then this conversation above them where there is something to it, where we just talked about how food bringing people together is a show and sign of humanity. And then you have these guys up in the ceiling talking about, like, what do you want to eat after we're done? Oh, well, let's get some Italian. I don't want Vietnamese. I don't want Chinese. They're talking about murdering these 2 individuals like it's nothing. And then they're talking about eating afterwards. Like, it's almost funny how disturbing it is. And so there is a dark side to that, right? There is a dark side to that food and humanity. There is a dark side to it as well. And again, I feel like there is a concept of everyone having corruption within them. It's just a matter of how it's brought to the surface. I feel like the ones that have been through Kinderheim had that conditioned to where it was brought out at certain times, especially in the case of Grimmer. Grimmer associated it with the Magnificent Steiner, that he thought of that TV show, and that like conditioned him to like kind of black out while things happened, right? And that program trained them to be soldiers that would like be these agents that at a moment notice with the right trigger would kill people. So it's crazy, right? It's absolutely insane. He's like, let's wait a little longer. And Grimmer can't exactly understand what they're saying, but he's just sitting there like having a panic attack. Grimmer is trying to figure out what to do. And poor Sook is like, I don't know what to do. And they're like, let's break through the floor. And Sook says, I don't want to die. And that's when Grimmer having this like panic attack and like everything spinning around him and him like just spiraling is terrifying. Again, terrifying. And we see him scream, and him screaming is literally in the same way that Johann screams when he reads the book. So we talk about there being these triggers. So is the book a trigger for Johann to like snap into monster mode? For Grimmer, is it being in this life or death situation that snaps him into monster mode? There clearly is a difference there. I love Tenma, though, coming up behind the sniper and asking him what's going on. And the thing about it is, Tenma doesn't kill him. I wondered if he would. For a split second, I wondered if Tenma was going to shoot the sniper, but he knocks him out instead. I wondered if he was going to kill him, but he doesn't, because that's Tenma. And then by the time he goes over, the moment he said it was too quiet, I was like, oh, Grimmer's already killed them all, because he snapped. And he did. Yeah, like he just bashed them up against the wall and killed them with his bare hands. Yeah, just how many pairs of khakis and shirts does this man have? Because those are ruined. And yeah, it just shows they are just bashed up against the wall. Yep. And Tim was like, oh! I love Tim's reaction, just like, oh, well, hi. The magnificent Steiner has done it again. And Tim was like, hey, Grimmer, what's up, man? How's it going? The magnificent Steiner has done it again. And Tim, like, tries to snap him out of it, been like, hey, are you okay? I'm here. Please don't. I was wondering for a hot second if Grimmer was going to, like, turn on Tenma. But the moment he was like, Grimmer, I was like, please let there be something that snaps him out of it. And it is. And he's like, oh, hey, Doc, you made it. He's like, can you save him? He's a good boy. There are a lot of other patients here, too. And Tim was like, what the hell? I'm glad in this moment that this episode, let me say this. I haven't said this in a while. When we first met Grimmer and he was with Tenma, it was right off the tails of Tenma shooting Roberto. And Tenma was in a very bad place and he was very down in the dumps. And I have been really happy in this episode to see Tenma be in better spirits. Like, he's back to being how he was before shooting Roberto. Like, not happy, not in a great place, but he's not, like, in the depths of despair, you know, questioning whether he can be a doctor anymore. And here, he doesn't even phase to save the people and perform the life-saving treatment that they need. He doesn't hesitate to do it. And I think that back when Grimmer met him after shooting Roberto, he was questioning whether he'd be able to do it anymore, and here he can. So I do feel better about Tenma's state of mind and state of being at this point than I was back in episode 40, but I feel like Tenma at this point is like, you know, when my two coaches when I was on the speech team in college, they were very different. One coach was all the time grumbly, and the other one was all the time in good spirits, kind of like Grimmer. And then, but when the one always in good spirits, like, finally had a moment where they were like just really mad. When they got mad, they got really mad. And the grumpy coach would be like, oh, it's fine. And he'd be like the one to calm him down. I feel like Tenma is that person in this situation where he's like, he's been feeling bad, but now he's like, oh, I'm not the one that's the most messed up in the room anymore. I need to do something to make the situation better. So, yeah, God. And then Grimmer's like, oh, it's probably me that did all this. Oh my God. And Tenma's like, I love Tenma's reaction of his face of like, uh-huh. I love that Tenma's like, well, I can't judge you because I've shot someone too. Okay. But it's just like you see the gears turning in Tenma's head and everything that Grimmer has said to him about, you know, like, everyone's committed sins, but we all gotta do what we gotta do. He's suddenly like, oh, that's okay. We're on the same page now. And he's like, the other me living inside of me, which is Johann. It's so mind-boggling because back when Nina was like, there's another Johann, there are two Johanns. And what the wording of it is what gets me, because the wording of it matters. Words matter, right? And so the way that Nina had phrased it was that there was Johann 1 and Johann 2. That's what it sounded like. And it sounded like Johann 2 was the monster and Johann 1 was an angel. And I was like, do we think that they have dissociative identity disorder? or do we think, it made it sound like they had a split personality or DID or something like that. Grimmer is not saying that. Grimmer is not saying that he has another personality. He says there's an other me living inside of me. He's not saying, it's weird. The nuance of the language is weird. What I'm getting is that Grimmer says that the monster is part of me. And it just comes out at times. Now, does Johann believe the exact same thing? I think so. But Nina, the way she describes it, it's almost as if Nina's, the way she phrased it back on the dock almost seemed like it was making an excuse of saying, oh, well, we can't be mad at Johann because there's another Johann, a split personality that he doesn't have control over that, he has no idea about. Grimmer's establishing he knows that there is a monster inside of him and it comes out. He knew from the tape. He knows from the Magnificent Steiner. He is self-aware. And Nina, when she was talking to Tenma on the dock, made it sound like Johann was not self-aware, which I think he is. So that's a big difference for me. I think that both Johann and Grimmer are very self-aware of what they have inside of them. And Tenma's just like, the interesting thing for me is that Tenma doesn't immediately connect Johann to Grimmer. He just kind of stares at Grimmer like, what do I do with this information? And he's like, I came from Kinderheim 511. God, that makes so much sense now. Piecing it all together. And then we have the Magnificent Steiner, which looks like a Hulk reference. It looks like it's parroting the Hulk, except it's purple instead of green. And it's the idea of the Hulk whenever they would become a monster. Oh my God, it is the Hulk. It literally is. Like, I think of back of the Avengers movie where he's like, the secret is I'm always angry. That's the thing. Grimmer is like Bruce Banner. He's like just saying, he basically goes, I'm always angry. I just hide it very well. He is. He's like the Hulk. That's Grimmer. I do want to make note that there are some very stereotypical cartoon images. Like they have the stereotypical Chinese man as in the cartoon, which is funny. This is an anime, so it is very stereotypical, but it matches the historical time frame that this show is done in. And he says, and it shows him in front in his little khakis, his tiny little khakis, and his little hair being the same way as a kid. But there's this one TV screen with the light. It's like Poltergeist. It's just the big screen of light, and then there's just darkness all around him. Oh my God. The symbolism and the imagery is insane. He's like, I was always glued to the TV. The main character was a cowardly man who, when he was cornered by bad guys at crucial moments, would wake up and the bad guys had been beaten by the Magnificent Steiner. And there's just blood all over the walls. He's like, without realizing it, he'd become the Magnificent Steiner. Whenever he was in trouble, Steiner would appear. And Tenma's meanwhile like fixing all these wounds while he's talking, being like, okay, let's get it out there. And it's like, all my memories were completely erased by Kinderheim 511. And he's like, you probably couldn't care less since it doesn't concern you at all. And I like that Tenma's working, but Tenma's like, no, this does concern me because Johann's from there. Tenma has been, avoiding researching Kinderheim because he's been mainly focused on Johann. And now the threads are connecting. Now the two lines are connecting where he has to know about Kinderheim in order to know more about Johann. And we're getting back to that. And he's like, will Sook survive? And he's like, well, the bullets passed through, but the artery under his armpit is critically wounded. He needs to go to a hospital. And he's like, this does concern me. Kinderheim 511 does. I love Grimmer actually looking at him with those blue eyes. And then the ambulance comes. They get them all there. Y'all. Can I ship for a hot second? I'm sorry. But there was one bed trope. The fact that Tenma and Grimmer are in the hotel together. I just it's like, there's been, how many fan fictions have I read that have had this premise, this setup, everything about it? How many have I read? Many. I'm very sad that I have to wait until the end of the series before I can read monster fan fiction because I'm like, it's right there. It writes itself. I'm sure people have wrote fan fictions based on this one scene of them in the hotel room together. I know they have. If they haven't, why are they waiting? It's everything I wanted. and everything I needed. It's the one shippable moment we've had in like 10 episodes. And I'm here for it. I mean, you could ship Sook and Johann as Anna. I guess. You could do that, but... And so he's like, he's innocent, right? Yes. I like Grimmer with his bed head. It's so cute. It's so cute. Tim is moving on up. First he had Moore, and now he has Grimmer. He's moving on up in the looks department with his freelance reporters. He's like, if I go and testify, he's like, Tim, why did you, about what you said earlier, would you mind telling me about Kinderheim? And he's like, I don't really remember anything. I like that Grimmer's like, I don't remember much. I was brainwashed, so I don't know. And it makes sense now why Grimmer was so adamant about the kids. And not just because of his son, but watching over the kids, keeping them safe from what happened to him. And the difference is, he says, I remember fragments here and there. The dark hallway, which we see in the OP, right? The cracks in the ceiling, the creaking doors, the musty bed. They only become clear sometime after I left the place. Someone said I was 14 when it happened. And he was taken to another house to be raised by foster parents, by the system, right? So Kinderheim had the system where they would just go to these surrogate parents and get raised like they were normal people in society, but they were like, you know, sleeper cells, basically, that could activate at any moment and be trained to be spies. So yeah, so Grimmer hasn't really lied about any of this. He's just kind of phrased it in a certain way. The thing that gets me too now is going back to the scene with the kids on the soccer field. Whenever he falls down and bonks his head with the soccer ball and the kids all smile and laugh genuinely, it's the first time we see them do that. Because up until then, like even if you go to the manga, the scenes with all of them in it, like when he goes, if we see him in Prague, right? When he goes and sees the children, they show up and none of them are smiling or laughing. They're all kind of like, well, I guess they are smiling and laughing on the soccer field, but when he sees them in the house, they're all like stone cold serious and quiet. And they're all like, none of them are laughing or smiling. They all look like how he was at Kinderheim. He's repeating the same experiment. And it makes sense now while Grimmer was upset when he talks about, so I thought it was about his son that got him upset, that his son was at Kinderheim. But no, Grimmer gets mad because he's like, this education, it was human reprogramming. And he's like, isn't education the process of producing the people society needs at any given moment? What kind of education produces the right people to fulfill that demand? Education is an experiment. But Grimmer's mad because he's like, I was robbed of my memories as a kid and put through this brainwashing. And he's like, the atrocities you committed. Like it all, he's like, think of the things you did to those children. Think about the suffering you inflicted. And he's like, why are you looking at me like this? You think you've got it all figured out. And Petrov didn't realize he was a product of it, right? And he didn't tell him. And so he's like, well, I wasn't there when the darkness oversaw Kinderheim. So was Petrov there when Grimmer was there and there was the darkness? I don't know. But it makes sense now when he's out in the soccer field and the kids start laughing, calling him a dork. He said they're laughing. They're genuinely happy. And it's like Grimmer doesn't know how to be genuinely happy. And at that point there, where he talks about, he's like, you were raising these kids with love. He says, I wanted to cultivate human beings who wouldn't be overcome by darkness. And he says, love, a new discovery. And that's when Grimmer says that's the normal way that any parent raises a child. And he says, no, it was an experiment. So that brings up several things. One, the fact that Grimmer maybe doesn't believe that he's capable of love and that he's capable of being genuinely happy, which makes his character very tragic. But also the fact that did he find love in his wife and child, or the woman that gave birth to his child? Did he find love in that and that made him a better person? Maybe, we don't know for sure, right? But he talks about, I was put in a weird school where he was trained and I was given, he said, and the way he smiles, they gave me another name, Wolfgang Grimmer. And the thing about it is the smile is, you know, a facade, right? At this point, that look when he looks at Tenma and says his name is absolutely terrifying. And Tenma's like, okay, And then he says the house was an artificial neighborhood. It was basically just trained me as a spy like the others, right? Someone pretended to be my parents, and I studied all these languages. And how to smile was the hardest thing I learned. And that gets Tenma. Tenma's like, oh. Like, that's just showing kind of the torture and the psychological damage this entire system has done to someone like Grimmer. Tenma's seeing it now for the first time. So the question is, in getting to know Grimmer and getting to know Grimmer's upbringing and how similar it is to Johann's, because Johann learned multiple languages, was brought up in a similar fashion, it seems. Is that going to lead Tenma to understand Johann more, to question how Johann is different than Grimmer more? Is it going to lead to any level of empathy? Is Tenma going to make a connection between Grimmer and Johann and question it? There's a lot of things that can happen from Tenma and Grimmer sharing this information with one another, and we don't really get it. And he's like, we need to go to get Sook's hospital. And he's like, I saw it on the news. You're a prime suspect. And I love that Tenma's so worried about Grimmer. He's like, if you go, you're going to be targeted. He's like, you're wanted as a prime suspect. And he's like, I'm the only one who can prove Sook's innocence. And then Tenma just looking at him, and he just smiles like, I don't really have a choice. I want to save Sook. And so you can tell Tenma doesn't want Grimmer to get caught. I don't want Grimmer to get caught. Grimmer's like, I'm the only one that can save him, and we got to do this. So the question is now, are they going to go there, and is Grimmer going to get taken into custody? Are they going to go there? Is Johann going to interfere? Why would he interfere? What's going to happen there? Is Johann going to trigger? It seems that whenever Johann, it seems that if Johann's trying to torture Tenma to the ends of the earth, and if he has sympathy towards Grimmer, it would seem like he would get involved to prevent Grimmer from being taken into custody. It would seem that way. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I don't know if that's going to be the case. But I am so floored by the parallels between Grimmer, between Johann, between Tenma, between Sook, between Johann and Tenma, between Grimmer and Tenma. Like, there's so much there. And now that we know all about the smile Grimmer has, all about his character, I don't want him to die, damn it! I'm going to be really pissed if he dies in the next episode. I'm going to be very upset. So I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that isn't the case, but we shall see. So in the meantime, I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. Please, no spoilers, hints, or clues, but I'm excited to hear your comments down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, we'll find out what happens with the next episode of Monster. Bye!